Welcome to Verified Souls. Tonight we honor the memories of those lost to the mysterious and dark wilderness of Arizona's remote lands through true stories that will challenge everything you thought you knew about safety in the desert. The Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix have claimed more lives than any other Arizona wilderness. The Apache called this place the place of death, long before white settlers arrived seeking the lost Dutchman's gold. In October 2019, 41-year-old Madison Riley, a renowned wildlife photographer with a background in environmental biology, set out to capture nocturnal animal life along Oak Creek. She came with the belief that respecting the land and its rhythm would grant her peace. Yet the crimson cliffs of Sedona seemed to whisper an ancient warning as the sun melted behind them. With meticulous preparation, Madison had left detailed travel notes with her partner and informed park rangers of her intended route, confident that her methodical approach would allow her to observe the canyon safely. That evening, as the last light faded to a violet shadow, she realized the typical chorus of birds and insects had vanished, replaced by a quiet so thick it felt foreign, oppressive, and charged with meaning. She arranged her cameras along the creek's edge, noting every trembling leaf and the unnatural sharpness in the air. Each breath she took registered a subtle metallic tang, as if some unseen presence watched from beyond the torchlit perimeter. Madison worked as she always did, patiently, with an eye for detail. Her camera lenses glistened in lantern light, and the only sound was the gentle ripple of water. The ground felt colder than expected. Her skin prickled as she surveyed the ancient stones around her camp. Scanning the darkness for mountain lion tracks, she dismissed a sudden snap of twigs as nothing more than a startled deer. Still, the sensation of being watched lingered, threading through the canyon's silence like a warning. As she prepared her last night photograph, Madison's breath grew visible in the chilled air, every exhale deepening the quiet. She tried to tell herself that Arizona's wildness was simply asserting itself, pushing against the certainty of civilization, yet her nerves were taut. The wind carried sounds she could not decipher, soft, unintelligible whispers that seemed both new and impossibly old. It wasn't until after midnight that everything shifted. At 2:13 a.m., Oak Creek's gentle current seemed to stall, and the low hum of her electronic gear faded into an unnatural quiet. Madison looked up, half expecting an animal, and instead caught sight of a figure at the edge of the creek. It moved in ways she'd never observed. Impossibly tall, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend against nature, the figure's motions were disturbingly fluid, barely breaking the veil between worlds as its amber eyes flickered from beneath a tangled mat of hair. Madison managed to grip her flashlight, heart pounding, and the figure stared back with predatory curiosity before dissolving into the brush as swiftly as it had emerged. The temperature plummeted. She grew dizzy, and she swore she could smell copper, fresh, metallic, and distinctly out of place. The world was transformed. Madison realized she had crossed a threshold few ever recognize, and with trembling hands, she tried to record what she'd seen as best she could for her field log. She spent the next hour dreading what might come next. When she tried to photograph the night sky, her camera malfunctioned, glitching first with static frames, then outright failing. Changing batteries and memory cards offered no solution. Technology seemed to have become useless in Oak Creek's midnight shadow. Investigating the creek bed with the red beam of her headlamp, Madison discovered bizarre footprints in the sand. Elongated impressions, too large for coyotes, too misshapen for humans, marked at one edge by deep claw-like arcs. Her body pulsed with adrenaline and analytical resolve, each slow step more deliberate. The trees threw unfamiliar shapes, shadows flickered in peripheral vision. The ancient tribe warnings she'd once brushed off returned to her. Stories of skinwalkers, creatures that slipped between the solid and the spectral, wearing borrowed forms and carrying the land's oldest curses. Every detail in her mind became evidence. The temperature drop, the malfunctioning electronics, the feeling that the trees themselves pressed closer. The situation worsened rapidly. The chilly air grew heavy and oppressive. The wind now stilled, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Madison attempted to call for help. Her satellite phone and her emergency radio gave nothing but an eerie, high-frequency screech. She became convinced that whatever stalked her didn't want her to leave, or perhaps wanted its presence known only to her. Restless, she circled her camp, memorizing escape routes, but the land seemed to change under her feet, familiar landmarks becoming strange and distant. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of the creature, a fleeting outline in the cacti or rocks, watching with animal intelligence and malicious intent. Her flashlight faded, exposing her to the full weight of Arizona's haunted wilderness. Unease escalated into terror when the figure reappeared on the opposite bank, howling with a voice that was less beast and more the echo of pain itself. Madison lunged for her jeep, desperate, stumbling on the loose gravel. She risked a glance back and saw those eyes, amber glowing, never blinking as they locked onto her from the darkness. She reached the vehicle just as the air grew impossibly still, hands shaking furiously as she locked the doors and dialed emergency services. For several agonizing minutes she sat, unable to move, feeling the creature's gaze seep through the thin barrier between safety and oblivion. When police finally arrived, the officers found what Madison had already documented: strange footprints, a corrupted memory card with only one distorted image, and an atmosphere of fear that lingered hours after the creature had vanished. Her recovery in the emergency room offered little solace. She was examined for injuries, dehydration, and exposure. All the while, the details of her account were transcribed for official records. The local authorities launched an investigation. Forensic evidence included the footprint casts and the corrupted memory card, yet nothing definitive could be drawn except for the inexplicable abnormalities the area had long been known to produce. Tribal officers were called in, recounting similar reports over the years. These stories were never officially solved, simply added to the growing mythology of Oak Creek's haunted wildness. Madison's gear, her spirits, had been touched by something far older than local legend, something that defied explanation. Police logs referred to unidentified anomalies, and court documents referenced disturbed wildlife patterns and unexplained environmental changes. The case joined countless others, a precise clinical account with no known suspect and little hope for resolution. After her ordeal, Madison's life changed. She gave up solo trips to Sedona, preferring to capture beauty in places untouched by these mysteries. Her dreams remained haunted, her creativity tinged by the memory of those amber eyes. The local elders honored her survival, believing she now carried a portion of the land's wisdom. Madison became an advocate for respectful storytelling, urging fellow adventurers to heed old tribal warnings and share experiences with the same dignity offered to her in recovery. For those who've experienced similar encounters, the not knowing is perhaps the hardest truth, but their spirits remain connected to the wild Arizona landscapes they once cherished. Madison's story stands as a testament to enduring both supernatural fear and the land's silent resilience. Her memory lingers, woven through the canyon stones, a quiet promise that every soul lost or found in Oak Creek will be remembered, and that true horror occurs not in violence or spectacle, but in the deep, abiding presence of things that refuse to be understood. But the red rocks of Sedona are only the beginning. Arizona's wilderness keeps its secrets through every sunset, and sometimes the spirits watching from the canyon's silent heart are not done with us yet. Luis Mallory had always felt at home in the Arizona wilderness, a place where the hush of centuries was both a comfort and a warning. As a hiking guide, Luis prided himself on his preparedness. He checked and rechecked his equipment, ensuring each trek was planned to the last detail. A father of two and known for his level-headed curiosity about the natural world, he was also deeply aware of the Superstition Mountain's dark reputation. October's sunset painted the yellow rock faces a deep ochre, but as daylight ebbed, the air felt weighted with stories he'd once dismissed as only local folklore. This evening, Luis was alone, charting new GPS waypoints for trail expansion, work that might bring more visitors and revenue to the park services. His only companion was the light wind running through his jacket and the familiar ache in his legs from a day spent hiking. His radio clicked with steady static, keeping a fragile link between him and the outside world. In his notebook, he jotted down observations on the shifting shadows and deteriorating weather, noting that the world held an expectant calm, as if the terrain itself held its breath in the dying light. He followed the trail that wound up toward Flatiron, careful to avoid loose shale underfoot. A distant coyote howled, a comforting sign of life in the near silence. Nonetheless, as dusk settled in, the stillness thickened. The wind stopped abruptly, and Luis felt a chill crawl up his arms. He paused on a ledge to sip water. From here, the vast valley sprawled under dusky purples and blue. A few clouds drifted through the last sunlight, shadows reaching across the rock like long fingers. He checked the time on his watch. 7:41 p.m. It was then that he heard the wail, unexpected, mournful, so piercing that the tiny hairs on the back of his neck stood up. At first, he tried to rationalize it as a mountain lion signal, but the sound lingered, echoing with purpose and intelligence, impossible to place within the familiar catalog of wildlife. Curiosity winning out over caution, Luis shined his beam toward the sound, eyes straining for movement. He caught something, a silhouette impossibly swift as it moved uphill, vanishing almost as soon as it appeared. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet some deeper drive compelled Luis to understand what he had witnessed. He veered off trail, boots sinking into softer earth. The compass clutched tightly in his fist. Oddly, the needle spun on its axis, refusing to settle. Magnetic anomaly, he thought, despite never encountering such a phenomenon before. Luis scribbled an observation in his notes, unease mixing with a bracing shot of adrenaline. The shapes moving at the edge of his vision were hard to focus on. Parallels in rock and cactus blurred in the growing darkness. The silence became heavy, pressing in until even the familiar sounds of insects and nocturnal mammals vanished. Dust swirled at his feet in strange patterns, as though shaped by something more than wind. Luis took a deep breath and tried to recall instructions he'd given clients about remaining calm in emergencies. It did little to slow his racing pulse or silence the whispering doubt that he was now very much alone. Moving with caution, Luis continued higher, the headlamp beam slicing through dense undergrowth and half-dead mesquite. Yet every time he looked down to mark his path, the ground shifted subtly. His footprints fading, rocks rearranged, the trail altering in imperceptible, maddening ways. Suddenly, a shape darted between two boulders. Luis froze. The air around him throbbed visibly, a shimmer like heat mirage, but colder, more invasive. He focused on the figure, heart pounding, and saw, just for a split second, a creature flicker between a coyote's form and that of a thin, impossibly tall human. Its eyes were hollow, reflecting no light, and its movements defied logic, snapping through space as if gravity or muscle was irrelevant. Fighting panic, Luis crouched, willing himself to blend with the landscape. Every cell in his body straining against the urge to break into a run. He found himself paralyzed, pinned beneath an invisible weight. The air grew colder still, and dust coiled around his ankles. He tried to remember the stories he'd heard on reservation lands, whispered warnings not to walk these trails at dusk, told by tribal elders whose expressions had been serious, unwavering. But it was too late now. The thing in the shadows began to circle, its motions soundless, shifting from the guise of a coyote to a malformed person. Sometimes it appeared behind a boulder, sometimes directly in the thin stands of Ocotillo. Luis gathered every ounce of strength and stood. He spoke aloud, commanding whatever it was to leave, but the only answer was silence so complete it pressed on his eardrums. For a brief moment, the world stilled. No wind, no crickets, no distant traffic, only the ring of his quickening heartbeat and the feeling of being watched by eyes as old as the land. For the first time in years, Luis was frightened by something more than the mountain's physical dangers. In a sudden burst of courage, he made a break for the main trail, lungs burning, feet sliding on gravel. Behind him, footsteps, a chilling, syncopated echo followed, but never overtook him. He dared not turn around. He could feel the pursuit in the way the night pressed at his back, hot breath skimming the nape of his neck. Time dissolved into a blur of sweat and terror, every step toward the imagined safety of the mapped trail driving home, how far he'd strayed from the world he knew. He emerged into a clearing, breathless, with dust caking his face and arms. Somewhere behind, the footsteps stopped. The stars shone anew. Silence again fell. But now it was the silence of something that had retreated, satisfied, or simply giving up the hunt. Luis collapsed where he was, spent. When he opened his eyes, the night had passed into gray pre-dawn. A search party had found him, alerted by his emergency signal, dazed and incoherent, clutching his notebook with knuckles as pale as bone. Deputies inspected the area, finding faint, non-human tracks winding up into the scree. He was brought in for examination, recounting his experience to skeptical but concerned officials. Some of the younger officers shrugged, but a tribal ranger accompanied the crew and listened quietly, later assuring Luis that these mountains held dangers not found in maps or guides. Local tribal members echoed ancient warnings, offering small blessings for his survival. "You don't hike here after dark," one said flatly, "and you never follow the voices." In the days and weeks that followed, Luis's notes and GPS logs became part of the investigation into mysterious disappearances along the same section of trail. Forensic technicians studied the odd magnetic readings. Photographs of track impressions were archived for further study. Reports surfaced of similar encounters in the mountains, a litany of hikers chased by figures in the dusk, glimpses of beasts that weren't simply animal, radios dying at key moments, compasses fritzing out just as danger crept closest. Law enforcement was unable to draw conclusions, leaving the cases officially unsolved, but many admitted, off the record, that the superstitions were not merely the site of unlucky accidents. Those who'd lived their whole lives in the region whispered that the land itself made decisions about who could pass safely and who never returned. The community's reaction to Luis's ordeal was complicated. Some dismissed his story as exhaustion-fueled hallucination, but others, especially within the Navajo and Apache communities, nodded with a knowing weariness. Elders explained to him the power of names and stories, cautioning him to be careful about what he saw and what he repeated. Offers were made to cleanse his spirit with simple purification rituals, to ensure whatever had followed him out of the mountains did not linger in his dreams. Luis accepted, grateful for the quiet dignity shown him by those who believed. He developed a deeper respect for tribal traditions, leaving small tokens of gratitude at the trailhead, refusing further solo hikes at dusk, and explaining the reality of Arizona's hidden dangers to anyone willing to listen. His children noticed a somber shift in him. He became cautious, reverent, slower to step beyond the boundaries he'd once pushed with easy confidence. While the official investigation into the superstition encounters soon faded into a footnote about unexplained events, Luis remained deeply changed. At night, he kept his windows closed and scented with sage. He read widely about local history, unable to quiet his mind or rid himself entirely of the memory of those hollow, shifting eyes. Occasionally, he'd dream of the mountains, not as beautiful, inviting towers of stone, but as sentinels, silent and capable of judgment, watching all who walked beneath their shadow. He offered thanks every day for his return, no longer seeking explanations, but simply accepting the truth that some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us of our own limitations. Luis no longer led twilight hikes in the superstitions. Instead, he shared what he'd learned, carrying the story into every lesson he taught and every group he guided. He cautioned other guides, especially those outside the local culture, to respect the boundaries of ancient warning and to offer up small acts of remembrance for lives lost or vanished in those red stones. Perhaps, he reasoned, memory itself offered the only true protection. The mountains, with all their stories and dangers, weren't finished with their lessons, and as the sun set behind Flatiron's Ridge each day, Luis felt both regret and relief to be looking on from a distance. Arizona's wilderness keeps its secrets, and even as dusk devours the mountains, deeper mysteries still lurk further north, waiting for those who listen too intently or stray too far off where the world becomes thin and the voice of the land speaks in a language only ancient souls remember. Emily Tran always felt a peculiar sense of reverence when patrolling the ancient, otherworldly expanse of Petrified Forest National Park. At 28 years old, she was one of the youngest rangers on staff, analytical in her approach, meticulous in record-keeping, and known for documenting every minor anomaly in her nightly patrol log. For Emily, science and local legend existed as parallel truths. She believed that honoring both was essential to understanding the land. That October evening, cold pockets drifted through the rainbow forest, the petrified logs glowing with odd iridescence in moonlight that seemed unnaturally bright. The night was quieter than usual, wildlife sparse, and even the cicadas' chorus had faded. She tracked temperature and humidity as if the numbers themselves would reveal the secrets around her. But it was the hush that unsettled her most, a quiet so profound she felt compelled to whisper when keying notes on her handheld. Petrified Forest had always thrown up strange signals. Rumors of Skinwalker sightings were whispered among rangers, dismissed casually in safety briefings, yet never fully forgotten in the park's vastness. Emily had heard elders speak of places where the air holds old memories, places best left undisturbed after sunset. She'd grown up near Globe, hearing mothers warn children not to linger near the rainbow forest after dark. Tonight she felt the weight of those stories. On this particular round, Emily's path followed a winding trail past clusters of silvery logs, the ground hard and uneven. Her radio crackled briefly, then fell silent. A glance at her phone showed a strong signal, yet no calls. No messages would come through. The sense of isolation grew stronger. The park was empty except for her footsteps and the distant echo of coyotes. At 12:21 a.m., Emily reached a bend near Agate House, an especially remote section dominated by splintered prehistoric wood. Radios that had functioned all evening died abruptly, their silence replaced by a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very rocks themselves. She felt a prickling sensation, hair rising on her arms as if reacting to an electrical charge. A warning she couldn't rationalize. Her skin chilled, breath fogged in the air, and the boundaries between earth and story seemed to blur around her. Emily paused, listening intently as flickering lights danced near the periphery of her vision. The park logs, once comforting in their durability, appeared unnatural, as if fossilized secrets might break loose and slip into the living night at any moment. Drawn by those lights, she moved deeper into the rainbow forest, following an instinct she later described as a compulsion, not curiosity. She registered unusual cold zones, spots so frigid her teeth began to chatter, though the temperature reading wavered only slightly. Deeper in, she smelled earth rotting, a smell mingled with dampness and a hint of copper. At first, she thought it was a wild boar rooting, but no animals appeared. No prints marked the soft ground. Shadow shapes began to move beside fallen logs, too quick, too elongated to be natural, reminding her of the Skinwalker account's tribal law enforcement mentioned only in private. Emily's pulse climbed, and she started recording a voice memo as a safeguard if anything happened. The logs around her seemed to pulse with reflected energy, and the wind carried snatches of sound, rhythmic chanting, indistinct yet unmistakably human. Suddenly, she felt an oppressive weight on her chest, a sensation she'd only experienced once before, during a bad asthma attack. She staggered, fighting for composure, certain that she was not alone. Eyes, faintly luminescent, watched her from the dark as the wind carried whispers. Shapes flickered closer, and the trees themselves seemed to lean. Emily remembered stories about old things wandering the rainbow forest, creatures that blurred the boundary between legend and evidence, spirits that wore borrowed skin. She tried to move but felt an invisible resistance. Her legs felt heavy and clumsy, as if the ground itself had grown hostile. Panic threatened, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, reaching for the rational voice within her training. Note details, mark time, document. The presence grew stronger, coalescing into a close pursuit. Emily found herself fleeing toward a cluster of towering petrified stumps, heart hammering as she ducked behind the mineralized wood. She crouched low, breath shallow, straining to hear movement. The soft rasping of a body, animal, human, or something between, passing nearby. The temperature dropped another few degrees. Her teeth chattered, and dread became all-encompassing. The figure moved through the logs at a pace just slow enough to remain always present, never fully seen. Emily wondered if it was waiting for her to make a mistake. She felt like prey, studied by an intelligence unfamiliar to science but unmistakable to instinct. She crouched all night, knees aching, afraid to rise, even as the first hints of sunrise colored the distant horizon. When she finally stood, legs trembling, she realized she was surrounded by weird, looping tracks, elongated prints leading nowhere, circling her shelter in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. When Emily's colleagues found her at dawn, she was hoarse and shaking, eyes wide with the kind of fear not easily described. The rescue team documented her condition, treating her for dehydration and shock. They noted the strange tracks, took photographs, but hesitated to speculate openly. She gave a detailed account. Her notes brittle, voice subdued, never sensational. A clinical record of environmental conditions and psychological impact. Audio equipment reviewed after her return revealed a single cryptic chant, distorted by static, language unidentified but possessing an odd cadence. The team interviewed tribal authorities, who responded with quiet gravity. "The forest keeps many secrets," one said. "It chooses who hears them." A formal investigation followed, reviewing Emily's logs, the weather data, the footprints, that odd audio file. Her experience was added to a small but growing dossier of incidents, files marked by bureaucratic skepticism, local belief, and scientific ambiguity. Forensic specialists reported that the tracks could not be matched to any known species. DNA sampling offered no clarity, and the unusual electromagnetic readings from her malfunctioning radios became another anomaly in the park's troubled record. No suspects, no physical evidence, except for the lingering echo of fear in Emily's account. Reports referenced unexplained phenomena, and the park's historical log expanded by another line. Ranger Tran, encounter, rainbow forest, see attached media, and tribal consultation notes. In the aftermath, Emily's routines changed. She allowed herself to be gently guided by tribal elders, incorporating local perspectives into her patrol safety briefings. She offered warnings to newcomers couched in careful language, always acknowledging the limits of science and the need for cultural respect. Her advocacy for open eyes and closed mouths after sunset became part of official protocol, an effort to keep others safe without fueling campfire tales. Privately, Emily felt that she had brushed up against something profoundly ancient, something that resisted both categorization and denial. Her dreams grew erratic, filled with flashes of petrified trees and flickering eyes, voices chanting in tones too old to be translated. Occasionally, she visited the spot at dawn, leaving small tributes when no one was watching, for luck, for protection, for respect. Within the community, her story resonated most with those who lived on land generations before it was a national park. Though many dismissed her experience as stress-induced, explained away by exhaustion, exposure, or trick of light, others nodded in silent recognition. Tribal elders shared hushed stories about Rainbow Forest's true name and the taboos restricting certain paths after dark. Emily's willingness to listen, her gentle acceptance of not knowing, earned her quiet trust among those who regarded the petrified logs as more than ancient wood, but as vessels of memory. She participated in purification ceremonies, learned bits of Navajo and Hopi language, and promised never to violate the boundaries of story and sight. The official investigation reached no conclusion. No perpetrator could be named. Every line of inquiry ended with a shrug or a warning not to return. Emily documented her experience as fully as possible, leaving instructions for future rangers to be wary among the logs and vigilant for changes in atmosphere, sound, and temperature. Her ordeal became part of training for new personnel, her fear distilled into cautionary advice for every trajectory that wound through the Rainbow Forest. Ultimately, Emily's journey through the night transformed her understanding of the park and herself. She grew softer in her judgments, slower in her pursuit of rational explanations. She now moved through petrified forest with greater humility, leaving offerings for spirits believed to inhabit the land, respecting places where memory seemed to linger more heavily. Her account became not just evidence for a file, but a reminder of the park's responsibilities to its past and those who walk its trails. She honored the memory of her ordeal quietly, carrying it like a stone in her pocket, heavy, unexplainable, but profoundly hers. And so petrified wood remains, long after all who've walked among it, ancient remnants that guard stories stranger and older than any ranger in a crisp green uniform could ever hope to tell. In these haunted lands, some threats still stalk the night, waiting for those who watch too closely, and for souls who listen to the silence where forests keep their oldest secrets. Samuel Yazzi's home was the beating heart of Tuba City, a place where tradition ran as deep as the roots of an ancient juniper, and where the boundaries between this world and the spirit realm blurred more easily than outsiders would ever know. At 50, Samuel had earned respect for his skills as a Diné craftsman, a weaver of rugs and stories, a steward of ancestral memory. His hands bore the marks of generations spent working with cedar, turquoise, and the old symbols. His devotion was evident in the way he prepared for each autumn's family gathering, a meal that was more than a celebration. It was an act of honoring lineage, resilience, and spirit. Whenever the cottonwoods along the Little Colorado River began shedding their yellow leaves, Samuel would summon his family to his home east of the old trading post, filling every room with laughter and the smell of fry bread. Yet on one October night, the traditions meant, as protection seemed instead to beckon something else, a force that would make this meal one that none of them would ever forget. The day had begun in sunlight, with grandchildren running in the yard and elders gossiping over weaving patterns. Samuel moved through his home, arranging the ceremonial table, setting out bowls of blue corn mush and strips of dried venison, each dish tied to memories of those no longer present. He mixed cedar and sweetgrass for the evening's blessing, careful to use only what his grandfather had once deemed sufficient to keep the dark away. His cousins joked about the city, about tourists, about the modern world's confusion regarding ceremony. Yet for all the jokes, when twilight descended, a solemn reverence took hold. The air thickened as the sun dropped behind the mesa. The ground seemed to exhale as if the desert itself was paying attention. Samuel placed a worn family photo at the center of the table, a silent invocation for protection, and called everyone indoors, just as the wind shifted, carrying a chill that had nothing to do with weather. By 8:06 p.m., the house was alive with voices and memory. Candles flickered as Samuel led the opening prayer in Navajo, asking for blessings on the feast and for the wisdom of those passed on to guide the evening. Dogs, usually rambunctious, slunk beneath the porch, whimpering as a steady hum came from outside, a sound that vibrated at the edge of hearing, low and insistent. It wasn't the wind, nor distant machinery. It was a pulse in the air, rhythmic and ancient. Samuel quieted the room, telling a story about the first weaver and the night monsters, warning children not to walk the riverbank alone after dark. Most listened politely, but his nephews teased, daring each other to step outside and yell into the night. He frowned, a bead of sweat forming at his temple despite the cooling temperature. Shadows clustered at the windows, thickening as the last shot of sunlight faded. The food was passed, jokes traded, but the laughter had an edge. Something felt off. The hum outside surged, synchronized with the shutters in the old timber walls. Samuel caught his wife's eye. She felt it too, an unease that needed no explanation. As dusk grew heavier, one of the children declared that he'd seen a shape at the door, tall as a man, but moving low, like a stalking coyote. The adults dismissed it at first, tricks of light, imagination. But then the dogs began growling, low and continuous, their noses pressed to the baseboards. Samuel's cousin nervously checked the locks, but even the metal seemed oddly cold. The room itself seemed to close in, the walls pressing tighter, as if struggling to contain something that wanted to come inside. Samuel rose, pacing from window to window, peering into the black. He saw nothing but the thick layered darkness of desert night and the outline of cottonwoods swaying without wind. The first real sign came in the form of a scratching, sharp, deliberate, methodical. Windows rattled, as if fingers or claws scraped just beneath the sills. Samuel stood motionless, his breath frozen. Then voices began, soft at first, rising among the shadows. They weren't the living. These voices mimicked the cadence and inflections of relatives dead for decades. His grandfather's gentle greeting, his aunt's reprimand, his father's laugh. They called out names from the family photo, asking to be let in to join the meal. Tears pricked at Samuel's eyes. He He was afraid to believe, but the voices grew louder, their tones too precise to be invention. He remembered the stories. Skinwalkers were said to use the memories of the living to gain entry, to wear the faces of those loved best. The children huddled together, the adults now shrouded in fear more potent than any urban violence. Samuel's oldest daughter clutched a turquoise necklace, muttering a protection prayer, as even the elders lost their certainty. At this moment, the room shifted. A presence entered not through the door or window, but through the air itself. Thickening, cold, charged with the taste of iron, the candles died down, their flames extinguished all at once, leaving only the faint glow of a phone. Against the far wall, a figure emerged. Its shape was blurred, always in motion, tall and hunched, morphing between the likenesses of family members and something more grotesque. Samuel's knees locked, and he struggled to recall the longer prayers, his voice barely above a whisper. The entity's arms elongated, reaching for the center table. Its face split and merged again, eyes shifting hue, voice alternating between child and elder, parent and stranger. Every time someone stared directly, the face changed, hiding behind new memory. Samuel's wife, acting with generations of learned courage, grabbed the bowl of cedar smoke prepared earlier. Together, they began to circle the table, waving smoke in prescribed motions, chanting in Navajo. The figure retreated but did not disappear, instead gliding along the ceiling and then crouching beside the photo, letting out a guttural sound that blended laughter and pain. Children cried. Adults shuddered, some unable to move. The only comfort came in the chanting, in the steady rhythm of the spoken word. For a long time, the figure stalked the room, its form twisting in impossible ways, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Samuel felt the pressure growing, a war between belief and terror that threatened to shatter the very reality of the house. With a final surge, Samuel faced the creature directly. He spoke into the void, naming each ancestor and asking for protection. He held the cedar bowl high, letting the smoke envelop him and his family. The figure howled, a sound that was not of any known beast, and darted for the door, passing through as if the wood was air. Outside, it circled the house, scratching and screeching for what seemed like an eternity. The dogs howled, and then, as if a switch had flipped, silence returned. The temperature climbed. The pressure in the air vanished. Samuel sagged to the floor, every muscle trembling, surrounded by his family's wide, terrified eyes. After the ordeal, Samuel called upon local spiritual leaders and elders who arrived before sunrise for a purification ceremony. Cedar burned in every room, windowsills marked with blue cornmeal, the family photo blessed and wrapped in a sacred cloth. Stories circulated quickly through Tuba City, some dismissing the incident as mass hysteria, others recognizing the encounter for what it was. Tribal police were informed. They studied Samuel's testimony, interviewed the children and elders, and ultimately added the case to a list of spiritual disturbances with probable skinwalker involvement. No one doubted Samuel's background, his honesty, or his memory. For many, his ordeal became a reminder that old protections must be maintained, even as new generations challenge tradition. The family home received additional blessings. The land itself marked to keep unwanted spirits at bay. Samuel's family kept close for weeks afterward. Each evening, a ritual of cedar burning was renewed, prayers recited over food and sleep alike. Children were forbidden to walk the riverbank alone after dark, and the older cousin who had taunted the spirit became solemn and withdrawn. Neighbors asked questions, bringing food and comfort. The quiet suffering of the house became a new, more silent tradition. the price paid for touching the edge of the spirit world without adequate protection. Samuel quietly wept in the night, afraid for his family, yet grateful for what the elders had taught. The land is living, its memory enduring, and every ceremony is an act of respect and courage. The investigation by tribal authorities led not to punishment or fear, but to renewed warnings for all who lived in or visited Tuba City. Officers spoke softly at community gatherings, repeating ancient advice. Honor the old ways, they urged. Remember boundaries. The Skinwalkers test faith, but protection is possible only if tradition is respected. Court documents labeled Samuel's case as unresolved but ritually stabilized. Forensics found no physical evidence save for odd claw marks below windowsills and a family photo marred by a thin scratch that was not there before the meal. Local historians noted the event as the latest link in a chain of disturbances that seemed to coincide with lapses in ceremony. An unprovable pattern, acknowledged only in whispers. As months passed, Samuel found peace in deeper rituals. His weaving took on new symbolic complexity. Each rug depicted protective designs and hidden prayers. The family continued gathering, now always with elders leading the blessing, making offerings of cedar to the land before and after each meal. Samuel's story became part of the oral history, told in classrooms and at tribal council meetings as a warning and a lesson. The spiritual leaders who aided in the aftermath reported increased incidents of paranormal unrest in the region, prompting more frequent community ceremonies and renewed calls for boundary respect. Samuel responded by teaching younger generations about the importance of humility, never mocking the forces that dwell at the edge of the night, always remembering that stories are not just past, but present. The spiritual aftermath lingered, but hope returned. Samuel's children learned the language of prayer more fluently, growing stronger in rituals once shrugged off. His wife spoke at community gatherings, reminding others that courage is not the absence of fear, but the act of surviving with faith intact. The youngest child, the one most frightened, eventually slept soundly again, comforted by the rhythms of tradition. Family members wrote letters to relatives across Arizona, sending them tokens and instructions on protection, and when spring came, the house was visited by neighboring elders, bearing blessings that promised peace for the coming year. Samuel never forgot that night. The voices, the shifting faces, the cold that sank into bone. He carried the memory not as a burden, but as evidence of resilience, faith, and communal strength. His ordeal became a pillar of family memory, a story honored not for the horror endured, but for the triumph of spirit. The rituals renewed that autumn were passed down, ensuring future generations understood that every meal shared at Tuba City is blessed and protected with intention and love. In honoring the ancestors that night, Samuel and his family reclaimed their safety and their place in the living, breathing continuum of the land. For those who heard the tale, respect replaced skepticism, wisdom replaced bravado. The home became a sanctuary for story and prayer, a living monument to the strength gained through tradition, humility, and communal faith. And sometimes, the biggest warnings echo not from the wild edges of the desert, but from within the sanctity of family traditions themselves. When boundaries blur and the spirits press close, only remembering who you are and who walked before you can bring back the light after the darkness has passed. Chloe Martinez was only 19 when she found herself standing in the shadowed valley of the Verdi, her belongings crammed into a battered backpack, resolve steeled by the rough hand of necessity. Her decision to run from a troubled home had not come easily, nor by impulse. Months of silent calculation, waiting for the right moment between exams, family fights, half-finished meals, had set the stage for her escape. Coyotes called in the distance that night, their cries wavering beneath a sky blackened by the coming storm. Chloe's father's anger still rang in her ears, his last words a curse, but she pressed on, stubborn and skeptical, determined to carve out peace amidst the tangle of legends that clung to the valley like mist. The local stories meant little to her, recited by neighbors, mostly to scare children away from wandering. Chloe had always dismissed them as fantasy, remnants of a world that had never belonged to her. The barn she found that October evening was neither safe nor welcoming. It was a ruin, listing to one side, its windows blown out by wind and time, yet for Chloe it was shelter enough. She crept through the dark, heart bruised from recent arguments, fingers trembling as she locked her bag inside the warped wooden door and buried herself beneath a frayed blanket scavenged from a pile of rotting hay. The cold pressed against her, but the quiet was a balm compared to the chaos she'd fled. In that moment, Chloe dared to hope that the isolation might bring clarity, that she could rewrite her future on her own terms. She lit her phone and read an old psychology textbook trying to ignore the silence, but her mind ran wild, haunted not by ghosts but by the doubts of abandonment and the weight of old wounds. She soon realized the valley was charged with a strange energy, a tension that built as twilight deepened. Breezes carried soft murmurs, fragmentary whispers no language could decipher, slipping through the cracks in the foundation. Chloe closed her eyes, banishing fear with defiance. She thought of friends back in Cottonwood, the ones who joked about monsters, but worried more about overdoses and missing persons. What frightened her now was not the supernatural, but the possibility of being truly permanently forgotten. Her skin prickled as she listened for familiar sounds, trucks, music, but found none. Instead, the wind rattled the barn, lifting dust and debris, and her flashlight flickered unnaturally, casting multicolored shadows across the old lumber. At 1:45 a.m., Chloe's heart skipped as she heard hoofbeats, distant, then close, then distant again, without any visible source. It was as if the night itself was moving through the valley, circling her hiding place with deliberate intent. She gripped the phone tighter, willing herself to stay awake and aware. Perhaps it was livestock escaped from a neighboring farm, she reasoned. Perhaps she was only tired and susceptible to suggestion. She lay still, breath shallow, measuring each sound against her memory of danger. From outside the windows, the barn creaked and groaned. The wind seemed to speak in fragments, words she couldn't quite hear but felt compelled to answer. Shapes began to move outside, nothing she could fix her eyes upon, but always present at the edge of vision. Chloe sat up, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She remembered a strange warning from a classmate years ago. Never look a skinwalker in the eye. And, though she'd mocked it then, now found herself unable to meet the blank stare of the shadows in the glass. Her flashlight sputtered, then failed. The air pressed heavy on her chest. The windows filled with grotesque forms, humanoid but far too tall and thin, their movements distorted and jerky as if animated by a broken marionette. Chloe fought the urge to run, telling herself that fear only fed the legends. The barn, however, groaned. As the night advanced, every board and beam seeming to twist in sympathy with forces unseen. Then came the direct confrontation. Chloe tried to text friends for help, but the phone died mid-message, its soft glow replaced by a searing, unnatural silence. She stood, heart pounding, as a beast appeared in the window, a shifting presence that blurred between animal and human. Its eyes were too deep, too intelligent. They held knowledge Chloe could not understand, sorrow she could not measure, and a hunger she dared not name. The creature pressed close against the glass, breath fogging the surface, then retreated, moving around the barn's perimeter. Chloe's fear was visceral, primal. But she forced herself to breathe deeply and recite a mantra she'd learned in therapy. I am safe. I am strong. I am not alone. The comfort was fleeting, but it tethered her to the moment. A sudden burst of courage drove her toward the door. She shoved it open and sprinted into the valley, feet flying over rough earth, lungs burning with exertion and panic. Behind her, footsteps echoed, slow at first, then frantically fast, chased by winds that seemed to speak her name. Chloe did not look back, not even when she heard the creature snarling, its voice alternating between guttural animal growls and fractured mimicry of her own pleas for help. She stumbled and fell, skinning elbows and knees, but the terror propelled her forward. The world shrank to the tunnel of her own flight, the barn receding behind her, the valley opening ahead. She ran until her vision blurred, arms flailing wildly, body pushed beyond fatigue's limits. At dawn, deputies found her collapsed against a fence at the edge of a pecan orchard, skin icy and voice nearly mute. They listened as she recounted the ordeal, her narrative measured and coherent, never once straying into hyperbole. The officers believed her terror, though their faces betrayed skepticism. They searched the barn and its surroundings, turning up no tangible suspects, but Chloe's account was officially logged as traumatic event exposure in the presence of possible wildlife. Search crews returned several days later, discovering abnormal animal tracks winding through the dust, prints that resembled those of a large canine, yet were misshapen, elongated, and deeply embedded in the earth as if left by something much heavier. Local tribal reports confirmed what Chloe's story implied. The valley had a reputation for skinwalker activity, and this episode fit the pattern. With each passing day, Chloe's sense of safety and self shifted. She moved to a safer area, finding solace in a shelter operated by church volunteers. The decision felt both like defeat and escape. She told her story only to social workers and a handful of family by phone, determined not to be labeled the girl who sees monsters. She warned friends away from the valley, insisting they take old legends to heart, even those she herself had mocked. Her sleep was troubled, dreams racked by forms at her window, voices in the night, the barn's twisted silhouette always waiting at the edge of vision. Chloe's experience did not become a story for town gossip. It was handled quietly, with care, and she found unexpected support in those who believed without needing proof. The ordeal brought her closer to understanding the fragile borders between belonging and exile, between skepticism and belief. She began volunteering as a peer counselor for others fleeing home, her empathy sharpened by direct knowledge of the cost of isolation. She learned to weave words into comfort, blending traditional stories about the valley's dangers with practical advice on survival, dignity, and respect. Chloe's worldview changed. She saw that the boundaries between legend and reality were not as solid as textbooks made them seem. The investigation into the incident continued. Tribal police visited the barn and orchard sites, gathering further testimonies from field workers who reported hearing strange howling and catching glimpses of unusual creatures after midnight. Forensic experts took samples of the animal tracks and discovered anomalies in gait and depth inconsistent with any known predator. Wildlife biologists reviewed the prints, found no matches, and ultimately attributed the events to unknown nocturnal forces. The case was marked as unsolved but deemed credible, no longer dismissed as hysteria or hallucination. Chloe's family struggled to process her story, torn between guilt for driving her away and fear for her safety. Her mother wrote letters asking forgiveness. Her father remained silent for months before offering a hesitant apology. Chloe's healing was complicated, shaped by the intersection of fear and newfound strength, haunted by memories, but buoyed by growing conviction. She attended community gatherings in Cottonwood, listened to elders recount tales of skinwalker sightings, and learned to carry ritual tokens, a braid of sweetgrass, a pouch of turquoise, for protection. Friends, once skeptical, grew protective and loyal, joining Chloe in organized efforts to mark and bless places rumored to be haunted. The valley itself became something mournful and sacred, a place to approach with respect, never mockery. Chloe spearheaded a campaign for local youth, urging them to honor boundaries, history, and the warnings of survivors. The barn was eventually demolished, the ground blessed by tribal elders, in a ceremony attended by both believers and skeptics. Chloe wept as the dust settled, both for lost innocence and the resilience she'd won through terror and escape. As months passed, Chloe's scars, emotional and physical, became reminders rather than burdens. She trusted friends, forged new relationships with adults able to listen and affirm, and began to understand her ordeal as part of a larger tapestry, a story not of monsters, but of endurance. She learned the power of community, the necessity of tradition, and the duty to warn. Each time she spoke her story, each time she gifted a token or taught a ritual, Chloe honored not only herself, but the generations before who had survived by paying attention. She found dignity in the act of remembrance, refusing to let fear rule her future. Chloe Martinez's tale is not about besting evil, but learning to live beside uncertainty. She chose to respect the unknown, accept the valley's lessons, and refuse exile even from her own story. The valley would not shelter her, but neither would it claim her spirit. Her footsteps linger in the earth, tracing boundaries for others to follow, a marker of the sometimes invisible line between legend and survival. And so, the Verde Valley offers no shelter for those who test the boundaries between worlds. Chloe's memory stands as caution, promise, and tribute, a warning to all who seek refuge in haunted places, and a torch for those whose hope survives where monsters once prowled the shadows of night. The Arizona highway stretched out before Jonah Peterson like an endless ribbon of asphalt, stitched into the desert's bone and blood by truckers who'd crossed these lands for generations. At 24, Jonah was a relative newcomer behind the wheel of a cross-state freight rig, taking odd jobs for small operators while keeping meticulous audio journals of his nightly hauls. The road was his classroom and confessional, a place to reflect on his superstitions and to record the odd encounters with wildlife and spectral stories that circulated among drivers. Tales of Route 66 abounded, stories that mixed missing persons and unexplained events with everything from UFO rumors to native legends. Jonah mostly laughed them off, yet every trip through Holbrook left him uneasy. Acutely aware that some stretches of highway were avoided by veteran drivers after sunset. When he rolled out of Flagstaff just after midnight in mid-October, the air was cool and dry, bristling with static from a distant storm. The radio flickered, giving bursts of local country music, then cutting out to a low hum that set his teeth on edge. Jonah started the recorder on his phone anyway. He was determined to keep a log, even when the highway seemed intent on swallowing sound. The landscape was stark under the moon, the distant outline of mesas wreathed in shadows, the headlights carving a path through dust and silence. The truck's interior was warm, familiar, scented with stale coffee and engine oil. Jonah drove in thoughtful quiet, watching the road for stray animals. Elk and stray dogs were not uncommon out here, and keeping one eye on the weather. He'd heard warnings from other drivers about stretches near Holbrook, where CB signals vanished and cell reception became patchy. He dismissed these as quirks of the terrain, but each time he neared the intersection with the old trading post, he felt a chill prickle across his arms. That night, Jonah tracked his progress in a handheld notebook. He marked the location and time whenever he noticed oddities. A sudden drop in wind speed, a chorus of coyotes that abruptly stopped, the brief glint of movement in the rearview mirror. At 3:11 a.m., as he cruised through a lonely patch between mile markers 289 and 293, a shape darted across the highway, so sudden and unexpected that Jonah slammed on the brakes. The rig shuddered dangerously, tires screeching in protest, headlights illuminating the vague form as it disappeared into the dark. Heart racing, Jonah swore he'd seen a figure, gaunt, animal-like, but upright, with pale skin reflecting the truck's beams in an unnatural way. He sat for a moment, hands griping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, then forced himself to relax. Glancing out the window, he searched for confirmation, but the world was silent. No car, no animal, no sound. He rolled down the glass, listening for footsteps or voices, but heard nothing but the distant hum of power lines. Uneasy, Jonah exited the vehicle to inspect for damage. The desert wind had died, the air was oddly cold, and he felt certain he was not alone. The phone he'd set to record his observations had died. Battery flat despite being fully charged just minutes before. His CB radio, normally a lifeline in remote areas, emitted only a hiss when he tried to reach dispatch. Static had replaced all his channels. Jonah's footprints crunched across the shoulder as he checked the rig's tires and undercarriage, finding no signs of an animal or body, but feeling the pressure of unseen eyes. Suddenly, there were noises, soft, deliberate tapping coming from the driver's side window, the kind of sound that would send chills down the spine of even a hardened skeptic. He froze, listening as the tapping became knocking, the cadence shifting to mimic Morse code, spelling out nothing he could decipher. Jonah's heart hammered. He forced himself not to panic, scanning the shadowed edge of the highway for movement. The headlights flickered, giving off an acrid burn. Out of the darkness, a figure materialized. Not animal, not person, but something between, its form distorting in rhythm with the failing lights. Jonah blinked, and the shape shifted, sometimes standing on two legs, sometimes hunched like a beast. Its face was a mask, half coyote, half human, its features rippling beneath skin that seemed too thin. The creature pressed a palm against the glass, the fingers long and sharp. Jonah recoiled, scrambling for the cab, locking the doors as the entity vanished, leaving behind the faint stench of rotten eggs and copper. Inside the truck, panic threatened to take over. Jonah attempted a call on his emergency satellite phone only to find the device inexplicably dead. The screen green was static. He recorded a message on his remaining handheld audio device, his own voice trembling as he narrated events for posterity. Every attempt to restart the engine was met with resistance. For a full 10 minutes, it refused to turn over. The only sound was the distant echo of footsteps tracking the perimeter of the cab. The music on the radio returned but spoken backward. Nothing but garbled syllables and distant chanting. Jonah whispered a childhood prayer, remembering advice from an Ojibwe grandmother about traveling safely under the hour of spirits. Whether by coincidence or mercy, the engine finally turned over. He sped away, never once daring to look in the mirrors. 30 miles down the road, Jonah encountered highway patrol at a routine rest area. He stammered his story, describing the figure and the electronic failures. The officer, a middle-aged Navajo, remained silent while Jonah spoke, then nodded gravely and offered him a canteen. "You're not the first," the officer said quietly, "and you won't be the last. Patrol logs show more and more incidents at this hour, unexplained noises, figures, even road disappearances." Jonah was written up for emotional distress, the encounter marked in his log as Route 66 paranormal event, driver shaken but coherent. The patrol searched his rig for evidence, found nothing out of the ordinary except for a fine dust, almost metallic, coating one tire. Back at the depot 2 days later, Jonah posted his audio journal online, sharing his story with other truckers and local residents. The feedback was immediate. Dozens emailed with accounts of similar encounters, radio failures, animal-shaped figures, even lost time while driving through stretches near Holbrook. Some suggested he had encountered a skinwalker. Others theorized mass hysteria. Tribal police compiled his account with others, reviewing for patterns, while officers debated internally about working the route after midnight. One deputy confessed off the record that she had seen something she'll never name along the same highway. Others admitted nightmares of shadowy travelers who moved faster than the eye could track. Local legend solidified into shared warning. Respect Arizona's night spirits or risk coming home changed. The forensic investigation cleared Jonah of substance or fatigue. Logs showed consistent reporting and no technical malfunctions outside the stretch between mile 289 and 293. Audio experts analyzed the backwards music, unable to explain the phenomenon, but confirmed the tape's authenticity. Wildlife officers found crocodile tracks along the road, too deep, oddly deformed, and leading nowhere. The case was filed as unexplained nocturnal encounter, a phrase that comforted no one but ensured no blame could be assigned. Jonah's employer offered counseling. He took it, using the support to process not just fear, but the impact of confronting legends given flesh. Jonah's story took root in the community. He shared cautions with new drivers, telling them to carry totems and avoid the old trading post route after 3 a.m. His experience became legend among young truckers, treated with a seriousness not reserved for urban tales or ghost stories. Jonah was invited to participate in local rituals, nighttime blessings performed with sage and cedar, taught by Navajo leaders to keep spirits at bay. Over time, he learned that not all stories were meant to be solved. Some were warnings, some roads meant to be traveled only with respect, not bravado. He kept track of further incidents, building his own file and sharing with tribal police when credible events arose. The months passed. Jonah drove the highway only at daylight, declining lucrative nighttime hauls. His reputation grew as someone who survived with dignity. He spoke at safety briefings, recounting the incident not with pride, but with the quiet reverence of someone who had met Arizona's invisible boundary. "We're all travelers here," he said more than once. "But some roads belong to older spirits. You respect them, or you learn the hard way." His story merged with the patchwork oral history of Route 66, part fact, part warning, all truth to those who listened. Even as he found healing, Jonah never forgot the figure that pursued his rig, the scent of copper and dust, the inexplicable cold that pressed through metal and glass. Every so often he returned to the intersection, leaving small tokens on the roadside. A braid of grass, a coin, a prayer. Others did the same, and drivers passing through marked the spot as a place to slow down, observe, and honor those lost along the way. Patrol logs continued to mark odd encounters, but Jonah's experience remained the most detailed. Police, tribal officers, and truckers kept it alive, not as entertainment, but as living memory. Highway legends, he learned, are more than stories. They are signals to beware the powers unseen, daily reminders that not all journeys can be taken lightly, and that the night holds lessons for anyone who believes themselves too clever or too jaded to heed ancient warnings. Jonah Peterson's story now stands not as proof, but as witness. A man who met the shadow of the spirit world, survived, and kept the memory alive as warning and tribute to the countless souls endangered by legends written not in books, but in tire tracks and midnight prayers fading beneath Arizona's haunted skies. Tara Whitehorse had grown up surrounded by stories, some spoken quietly at family gatherings, others recorded in notebooks she wasn't meant to read and would decipher by moonlight. As a cultural anthropologist dedicated to studying Navajo traditions, Tara returned to Canyon de Chelly in the fall of 2020, intent on gathering oral histories and documenting legends passed across generations. Her work was delicate, respectful, and driven by reverence for the elders who had watched these canyon walls since before the arrival of the first settlers. She knew that the land itself seemed alive, its red earth breathing out secrets in the cool night air. But she also knew the boundaries. There were stories one did not record, names one did not repeat, rituals one did not practice without invitation. The anthropology fellowships she'd earned demanded rigor and documentation, but her own sense of purpose insisted on empathy and care. That October, Tara was welcomed by her cousin's family, given a bed in a traditional hogan near the base of Spider Rock, and told to listen closely, but never to ask too many questions about what should not be named. Early days at Canyon de Chelly were filled with laughter and gentle lessons. Tara watched children play by the crumbling ruins of an Anasazi cliff dwelling and heard distant horses whinny as they traced paths known only to their grandfathers. Whenever she entered the hogan, she offered a prayer of gratitude and followed the rules given by the matriarch of her cousin's household. Never whistle at night, never bring mirrors to the canyon, and never write down stories about spirits unless the speaker had given a specific blessing. As dusk fell on her third night, the elders assembled beneath a wide cottonwood, their faces illuminated only by firelight and the rising full moon. Tara listened, notebook closed, as they spoke in Navajo and English about the land's history, tracing battles, betrayals, and tragic disappearances. Some spoke of kin lost to the river, others of warriors who never returned from raids, but the heart of their stories circled around warnings. Not to challenge the canyon, to respect each season, to remember what lives unseen in the red stone. The air beneath the cottonwood was sacred. Every breath a negotiation with forces Tara felt but could not see. She honored the pauses in conversation, the hush that descended when certain words or topics appeared. The elders shared fragments of ancient chants, moments of silence for those whose spirits lingered in the canyon. During storytelling, she sensed a tension, as if something watched from outside the fire circle, biding its time for the careless question or foolish interruption. Tara remained cautious, jotting details on paper after conversations ended, never directly quoting those who preferred their stories remain unrecorded. She observed traditions, learning when to stand, when to sit, when to leave offering stones at the water's edge. Her fieldwork began to take on the cadence of ritual, her respect for boundaries deepening with each passing night. On her sixth night, as the moon rose higher and the canyon's walls shimmered with reflected light, Tara gathered beneath the cottonwood for a final round of stories. It was 11:51 p.m. when the air shifted. The storytelling halted, elders growing silent as an unseen force crept among them. The temperature dropped rapidly, a chill collecting in the sand between their feet. The matriarch lifted her hand, motioning for quiet, then began a protective chant, her voice carrying a tremor Tara had not heard before. The canyon itself seemed to absorb the sound, amplifying it and reflecting it back as a low hum. Animals nearby scattered, horses reared and bolted, dogs whimpered and lay flat. Tara felt the ground move beneath her, a subtle trembling that set her teeth on edge. That night, the elders started protective chanting, their words layered, sometimes overlapping, sometimes spoken in hissing whispers Tara could barely comprehend. She looked around, every elder's gaze fixed on the canyon's entrance, hands clutching small tokens of turquoise and bone. The air thickened as the chanting deepened, and the silence was broken only by the rhythmic heartbeat of the words. In that sacred moment, Tara sensed the presence of something unnatural, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight, a force that waited for a mistake, for a wrongly told story, or an improperly uttered name. She recalled warnings from childhood, remembered admonitions not to record certain stories, to honor names only in prayer, never on paper. Suddenly, a figure appeared, not in solid form, but in the bent light where moon met shadow. It twisted the night around itself, distorting the edges of the world, coming closer with each breath of the chanting. Tara's hair rose on her neck, her pulse fluttered against her ribs. The elders shifted, forming a subtle half-circle, reciting another layer of protection. The figure shimmered, sometimes resembling a person, sometimes animal, sometimes nothing at all but moving air, thick with intent. Its presence was ancient, overwhelming, marked by an odor of dust, stone, and copper. Tara found herself frozen, rooted to the sand, unable to speak or even think clearly except to repeat the protection prayer she'd been taught as a child. The Skinwalker, if that was what this entity truly was, never crossed the boundary of the fire's circle, but it pressed in, warping the air, rattling bones, chilling lungs. Older family members began shifting tokens, scattering blue cornmeal on the ground and red ochre near the roots of the cottonwood. The chanting reached a crescendo, the voices of ancestors seeming to join from some distant echo. Tara closed her eyes, tears streaking her face, feeling herself move beyond fear into the stillness of surrender. The elders darted glances her way, shielding her, guiding her breath, reminding her silently that she was not alone. The tension broke as the entity retreated, replaced by the settling of sand and a rush of warm air. After the encounter, Tara was shaken but protected, her sense of belonging forever altered. The elders led her through post-event rituals, urging her to drink cold water, breathe deeply, and repeat the names of the spirits who watched over the canyon. They told her that sometimes the land teaches lessons, a warning to outsiders, a correction for missteps, but also an invitation to learn humility. She was told never to record the events, never to speak of them in detail except among those who had been present. Some things were not meant for the archive. The elders explained that recording certain names, stories, or chants could invite spirits or consequences no outsider could withstand. The gift of memory, they said, was heavy, and Tara now bore some of the canyon's truth within her. The next day, Tara joined a community workshop on protection and story stewardship, her research methods forever transformed. She told students and colleagues that the work she did in Canyon de Chelly could only be shared in pieces, always filtered through respect, always under guidance from those with lineage in the land. Her report shifted from rigorous documentation to philosophical reflection. She prioritized the voices of the Navajo above her own interpretations. She learned to collect memories without claiming ownership, to honor stories as living things, to share only what she was given permission to reveal. The experience humbled her, refining her approach until it better mirrored the traditions she had come to love. When investigators sought details of the encounter, local tribal police, park rangers, visiting scholars, Tara repeated what the elders had taught. It was a lesson. No physical evidence, no photographs. The canyon chooses its witnesses. No tracks, no artifacts, nothing but the lingering sense of awe and the small tokens left behind at the sand's edge. The official case was marked as spiritual event, unrecordable, witness protected. Elders spoke at council meetings, reassuring the community that lessons had been received, that boundaries would be respected, that tradition remained stronger than curiosity. Word spread through the canyon and its neighboring communities. Tara's experience became part of the oral history, not sensationalized, but honored as testament to the importance of respect, protection, and spiritual stewardship. She was invited to teach more workshops, to mentor young anthropologists, to ensure that future research at Canyon de Chelly would blend rigor with humility. The event became a lodestar in discussions about the ethics of fieldwork among indigenous communities, a reminder that some stories belong only to those who live them. Privately, Tara felt changed, her mind clearer about the limits of knowledge, her heart fuller with gratitude. She continued her research, always starting with a blessing, always ending with an offering to the land. She told students and friends that every legend contained more than facts. Each held lessons about survival, honor, and the intricate relationships between land and spirit. Her responsibility was not just to collect stories, but to protect them, ensuring the souls bound to the canyon found peace through remembrance, not exposure or exploitation. And yet, among sacred canyons, the shadows are never done teaching lessons. Tara's journey left her with new wisdom, humility in the face of ancient mysteries, reverence for tradition beyond any database or academic paper, and a commitment to honoring those who came before. Whenever she returned to Canyon de Chelly, she moved gently, carrying offerings for spirits and promises for ancestors. Her steps marked a path both for herself and for all who might one day seek answers among stone and shadow, a path paved with caution, respect, and the lingering memory of the moonlit warning that taught her, once and for always, that the boundaries between worlds are not easily crossed, and that every soul belongs to the land in ways deeper and older than any scholar could ever measure. Gregory Holt had spent his life deciphering wilderness, first as a Tucson firefighter used to chaos and alarm, then as an amateur botanist mapping every variety of pine and juniper to the north, and finally, in retirement, as an inveterate camper seeking solace in the Mogollon Rim's select brand of isolation. He was 54, and despite the trial and sorrow stamped into his hands, possessed a quiet optimism that Arizona's wild regions offered healing, not harm. Gregory was deliberate about his solitude, moving methodically through his routines with the calm of someone who knew that survival in the woods meant both vigilance and humility. His departure for the Rim in late October was well prepared. GPS waypoints synced, weather checked, rangers notified, family left with an itinerary, and his usual "don't worry" of her "I know these woods." The Mogollon Rim held a special magic for him, beauty carved from volcanic stone and ancient pine, the promise of days spent in silence and nights filled only with stars. He camped below the towering ponderosa, thick clusters that muffled sound and shaped the light into shifting mosaics of green and amber. The ground was still warm from sun, but the tang of frost lingered, promising early cold. Gregory journaled, tracking wildlife, as dust spread across the horizon, every bird call cataloged, every distant coyote noted in his battered notebook. Squirrels chattered as he brewed coffee on a small stove. Roosting birds fluttered overhead. By dark, the stillness was complete, a hush uninterrupted by the intrusions of civilization, the kind of quiet that felt holy rather than lonely. Gregory wrote by lantern, reflecting on recently lost friends and the burdens of lives spent running into flames and danger. Nature, he wrote, was his medicine. He sat against a broad pine, letting the solid trunk support his weight, the scent thick and scratchy in his nose. Above him, the wind began to stir, stirring pine needles and twisting branches, the air alive with movement, though no storm was forecast. Night arrived quickly on the rim. Shadows elongated, pulling in odd directions. The darkness absolute but somehow restless. As Gregory settled into his sleeping bag, a series of small crunches echoed through the trees, the ordinary sound of wildlife, but oddly rhythmic, suggesting a larger, more intentional visitor. He lay still, calculating the distance to his vehicle, the improvised perimeter set by lanterns, the trajectory of possible escape routes. It was 10:18 p.m. when footsteps became undeniable. The crunch of pine needles was slower, heavier, an insistence that pressed in from all sides, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating. The air seemed wrong, too cold, too dry, worse than any cold snap he'd experienced camping. The wind vanished, replaced by a flutter in leaves that moved without apparent cause. Gregory turned off his lantern, letting moonlight govern his senses. He reached for his flashlight to scan the trees, but the device faded, its batteries inexplicably dead despite having been checked only hours before. Silence ruled. Gregory's heart pounded, a signal not of panic, but of primal warning. He was experienced enough to know that not every danger announced itself, and not every sound could be explained away by rational wildlife. The urge to pack up and run jostled against his training to stay put, remain calm, and not invite disaster by fleeing blindly. He touched his pocket, feeling for matches, thinking through the protocol for signaling distress. He thought of native stories, those shared by fellow firefighters and heard at tribal gatherings, warnings about things that walked between worlds, creatures that borrowed form to test the boundaries of the living. He had dismissed most as poetic metaphor, but tonight, in the rim's enveloping dark, every word felt acutely possible. Shapes flickered among the trees. Gregory saw a pale figure, first near the broken stump, then beside the trunk he leaned against. It was thin, almost skeletal, sometimes upright, sometimes low and feral, always shadowy at the margins but never fully revealed. His body tensed as whispers filled the air, fractions of words, syllables distinct but indecipherable, floating unseen like a chill gust. The light tickled the edge of the creature's skin, as if refusing to grant it substance in a world not meant to contain it. He thought again of Skinwalkers, of old warnings. If you hear your name in the night, do not answer. Gregory kept silent, willing himself invisible. The figure drew closer, circling the campsite with a gait both fluid and broken, the footprints crisp in the pine duff. Gregory's flashlight was of no use. He strained his eyes to listen and see. The whispers grew louder, and the device he'd used to record birdsong caught the static of a distant chant. The entity moved with intelligence, tracking Gregory's every breath, shaping its direction to his smallest motion. The air thickened. His skin prickled with each moment of contact, an ache of animal instinct warning him to prepare for flight. He grabbed his notebook, squeezing it tight as though memory itself was some sort of shield. The whispers found cadence, rising to a fever pitch, as the creature neared his shelter. Just beyond the light, he saw two glowing eyes, more animal than human, rimmed with yellow, unblinking. Gregory's courage remained, forced by years of training to face the unknown, not with bravado, but with intent. He crept away from the fire pit, circling back toward his vehicle, every movement slow and purposeful. Behind him, the entity mirrored his path, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, occasionally vanishing into the woods only to reappear directly ahead. Gregory's mind reeled, trying to process the logic of its movements, calculate its intentions, maintain his distance. His breath was loud in his ears, each step an equation between hope and disaster. Suddenly the creature followed, quickening its pace, its form a blur between coyote and tall, pale man. Gregory sprinted, knees aching, boots kicking up duff, lungs squeezing with effort. He did not scream. He knew that attention could invite more than rescue. The woods grew dense, branches snatching at his sleeves, tearing at his skin in the shallow scrapes. The entity seemed to move effortlessly, never stumbling, never slowing. Pine needles rained down, footprints encircled small rocks and stumps, and the shadows stretched behind Gregory's laboring body. He reached the clearing, out of breath, resolve tested, and found the forest settling gradually into quiet. The creature stalked the edge, sometimes present, sometimes not. The whispering ceased, replaced by the occasional snap of twigs. Gregory collapsed by the side of the trail, knees burning, head spinning, fingers clamped tight to his journal, as if the act of writing might summon help. He stayed awake until dawn, refusing the comfort of sleep, noting every sound, every footfall, every moment of static on his recorder. When sunrise finally cracked the trees, the entity had vanished, replaced by birdsong, the usual morning traffic of squirrels, and a single hawk spiraling overhead. Search and rescue volunteers found him later that morning, dehydrated and disoriented, wandering a familiar trail but unable to explain exactly how he had returned so far from his original camp. They noted unusual tracks, deep, incomplete footprints, the pattern odd but not altogether unfamiliar to those who knew the stories of skinwalkers. Gregory's skin was clammy. His eyes were locked somewhere distant, his own voice touched by awe and terror. He received immediate treatment for exposure, his symptoms logged under unexplained nocturnal trauma, an entry cross-referenced by local authorities with similar incidents in the Mogollon Rim. The forensic review cited local legends and discovered incomplete prints and strange odors, dust mixed with copper, the kind known to accompany events outside scientific explanation. No one doubted Gregory's credibility. His reputation as a skilled survivor and meticulous diarist left little room for skepticism. Tribal law enforcement responded quickly, collecting footprints, interviewing Gregory, and cataloging the encounter in the expanding archive of unexplained occurrences in the Rim. Old rumors resurfaced. Families shared quiet advice. Mark your camps with protection. Honor the land's boundaries, and trust in the wisdom of elders. Gregory's case was filed as Encounter with Unknown Entity, Survivor Honored. After the ordeal, Gregory refused to let fear dictate his future. He kept hiking, but only by day, leaving small tributes for lost souls at campsites. He added prayers to his routine, gifts to the land before setting up camp, pieces of turquoise, braids of grass, the occasional carved wooden animal left as symbols of gratitude. His story was quietly embraced by the community, shared among local organizations, and featured in periodic workshops devoted to outdoor safety, spiritual respect, and dignity in survival. He became an advocate for responsible hiking, urging dialogue between park officials and tribal councils to promote protections rooted in both science and tradition. Gregory's healing was slow and incomplete. Nightmares persisted, but he found new meaning in ritual and remembrance. He spoke publicly about his experience, choosing careful words. Not tales of monsters, but warnings about the limits of human knowledge, the necessity of humility, and the power of honoring invisible boundaries. His notebooks filled with reflections, advice, recountings of other survivors, each entry evidence that truth in the Mogollon Rim was stranger than any outsider's imagination. He left the encounter with more than scars. Gregory became a living bridge between the rational and the spiritual, a voice for those searching for peace in haunted wilds. His steps through the pines marked a new path, one of protection, gratitude, and daily acknowledgement that every soul, human or otherwise, deserves remembrance. The Rim holds stories not just of horror, but of survival, reverence, and the simple acts of kindness that mark humanity's place in untamed wilderness. As dusk drew its veil over the forest each evening, Gregory left a final offering. May the souls of the lost find peace, and may those who walk here remember who came before. Thank you for joining Verified Souls on another chilling journey into the mysteries of Arizona's wilderness. If you value authentic storytelling that honors the memories of those who came before us, subscribe to Verified Souls today. Let our community of respectful listeners and true horror enthusiasts grow. And remember, every time the woods whisper, the souls of the lost are never truly far away. Until next time, may you walk safely, and may the souls of the departed always find peace.